Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler. Today we have a very special guest named Marcie Evans from Iowa City, Iowa. She's one of the pioneers of yoga therapy in the Midwest, which I so appreciate because I'm from Waverly, Iowa. I grew up in a small farming town in the Midwest, and I just really feel at home whenever I go back to the Midwest, especially to Chicago or Iowa or Minnesota, where my parents live now. I just feel this kinship with the people from the Midwest. So shout out to Marcie and all the others of you that are pioneers in the field of yoga therapy in the Midwest. We're so happy to have you with us on the Yoga Therapy Hour. And today we're going to talk about yoga therapy and autoimmune disease. And this is something that I personally have quite a bit of experience with because I've had autoimmune disease for many years now, and many of my clients that show up have it. And so Marcie and I have a very in-depth conversation kind of going over all the layers of the human system, what in yoga therapy we call the Panchamaya model, the physical, the breath, the mental, the emotional, even the spiritual, and really looking at how does autoimmune disease show up on all these different layers, and what is it that we can do to help heal autoimmune disease on all these different layers, starting with the nervous system, right? That our superpower as yoga therapists is the nervous system, and that the allergy doctor and the endocrine doctor and everybody has their thing, but we as yoga therapists are really great at helping to balance the nervous system, which connects to the digestive system and the endocrine system and all the other systems of the body. And that's really, in our opinion, the one thing that yoga therapy does really, really well is help with balancing and that nervous system and self-regulation. It's a really big deal for people who have autoimmune disease, and just the ability to build self-awareness and embodiment. There's so many things that yoga can do. So this is a wonderful hour together where we're going to talk about all of that. And I actually met Marcie in the Optimal State business course, where she has been a star. She is a wonderful businesswoman and expanding into all sorts of new directions. And it's been really fun to be in connection with her and be her colleague and just watch her out there. She's on Clubhouse, giving lectures and hosting rooms. She's on Instagram. She's on Facebook. And I look forward to sharing Marcie Evans with you. Welcome, Marcie. Thank you for coming today. So nice to have you.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, Amy. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. We've been getting to know each other over the last year, and we're both what I think are high-powered business women, as well as women who really care about making a difference in the world and serving our clients. And we're both from Iowa. So tell us about your center that you have in Iowa.
Yeah, so I have a small studio in Iowa. I work mainly yoga, Pilates, movement therapies, and I love my studio. I work a lot of hours here, and it's a lot of fun, and I get to see people from all different backgrounds, and it's very enjoyable. I love
What's
having
the
my
name
studio.
of your studio and what?
Yeah, it's Serenity Yoga and Pilates Studio, and it's in Iowa City, Iowa.
Wonderful. And the reason I ask is because one of our recent podcasts, I was talking to Kelly Bethel, and we were talking about niches and how to get your foot in the door as a yoga therapist. And she was saying that exactly what you're doing, kind of like a fitness center slash yoga therapy slash mindful movement, there's this niche there that once people get released from, say, physical therapy or occupational therapy, they may or may not be ready to go to a full-on 24-hour fitness or something. And to have these smaller specialty gyms with highly, highly trained people that can really do assessments and get to the bottom of how can you safely take care of your body while getting healthy. And that's kind of how I picture you. Is that how you see yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I'm the person that people come to when they don't know where else to go. So they may have been to gyms in the past and maybe they hurt themselves, or they have some special conditions or injuries that prevent them from maybe attending a traditional gym, traditional yoga studio. Class settings are hard for them. They may find that it's just not a good fit. And then they come here and they're like, oh my gosh, I belong here. This is the best place for me to be. And some of them are post-physical therapy. Some of them have tried physical therapy and they're bored with it, or it doesn't work for them, or maybe they just had it with physical therapy. They're tired of their routine and they want something new. So yeah, I get a little bit of everything, but it's really, really fun. And no day is the same. Every day is entirely different. I have a different experience every hour that I teach. So it's really, really fun and very enjoyable, and it keeps me busy. It keeps me on my toes.
And I think, kind of this offering of having Pilates and yoga therapy, and I'm sure you do like foam rolling or weight training. There's probably other modalities that you use also. I think that's really cool because not every single person needs yoga therapy or Pilates to be able to have that whole spectrum where you can kind of pick and choose which tools out of the tool basket you need is really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. I use all of them every day. So, just having all these different modalities that I work with is so invaluable for the clients. They need different things. They're not the same person. They don't have the same bodies. So they definitely need different things. And, even mentally, emotionally, and psychologically, they're very different as well. So you have to also consider those aspects when you're giving people, a certain routine or a certain practice to fulfill them. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, our topic today is something close to both of our hearts personally and professionally, and that is yoga therapy and autoimmune disease. And so I'll just start with a little bit of my story. I've never been diagnosed because it isn't showing up in the blood test, but I feel like I have a lot of the symptoms. A few years ago, I had the left lower side of my face was very enlarged. And I looked like John McCain. Nothing against John McCain. He's a wonderful human being, but I didn't want to look like him. And, to me, that was probably Sjogren's, but it just wasn't showing up anywhere. And it's been a long history. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, but I hope you'll expand upon it today. How autoimmune is so tricky because it shows up in so many different systems of the body. The solution is not a one size fits all. There's like all these different things you have to watch. You're this and you're that, which you're going to tell us about. It's just kind of it's kind of like chronic pain. Like, what's causing it? Well, it could be 25 things, and how to fix it. Well, it could be 50 different ways to work with it. Right. Yes. So Can you tell us a little bit about, I know you've had Sjogren's and several other autoimmune diseases. Can you just tell us a little bit about your story and what happened to you that you learned so much about autoimmune?
Yes. So, well, the first, I think, piece is that diagnosis is very challenging. People go through many, many different changes in their bodies before they even get to the point of diagnosis. And I think that's one of the hardest parts is in my 19, 20 range, I'm now 45. So back when I was, 19 and 20, I started to have symptoms of Graves' disease. And Graves' disease it's a thyroid disease, a thyroid disorder. And many individuals who have autoimmune also have a thyroid disorder with it because their antibodies are actually attacking their thyroid, or one of the organs that works with the thyroid gland. So it's very common for individuals who have, say, Sjogren's or rheumatoid arthritis or, any of the other autoimmune diseases to also have a thyroid issue. So that was the second diagnosis I had. Before that, it was lichen sclerosis, which is a scarring of the skin and sometimes of the inside of the body as well. Sometimes you get organ scarring in addition. So that was my first diagnosis, but that was because it was external and the doctor could see it on the outside, and it was easy to diagnose because he could see it. Now, when we got to the Graves' disease, it was a little bit more challenging. The doctors actually then had to do blood tests to figure out, what was going on. So if it's like you and, you may have symptoms of autoimmune disease, but nothing's showing up in the blood, it's very, very hard to get a diagnosis. So it's hard to know what to do when you don't have that label or that diagnosis to tell you, hey, this is what you have. This is what you may experience. And this is also how this disease might progress if you don't do anything about it. So it makes it very challenging. So those were my first two diagnoses. And then actually everything went into remission. I began doing yoga, practicing yoga, changing my diet. I also used some Western modalities as well. I started taking a medication that was supposed to be a medication that would put Graves' disease into remission, possibly. It was like a 33% chance of going into remission permanently. And 2 years later, after I started the medication, the yoga practice, the dietary changes, I went into remission. And I've been in remission for 25 years-ish, around there. So that's been in remission for a long time. However, autoimmune disease always presents itself in new and different ways, depending on what's going on in your life.
It's kind of like whack-a-mole, isn't it?
It is crazy. It's crazy. So then, I went several years without having any issues at all, got pregnant at 32, had my daughter, and then boom, right after I had her, everything went crazy again. And I had no idea what was going on. I had serious joint swelling. I couldn't wrap my hands around the steering wheel. I couldn't walk for like a month. I laid around because I didn't know what to do with myself. I was in so much pain. I couldn't move, and everything was swollen, everything. And I just kind of thought, well, maybe I should go back to my yoga therapy. Maybe I should go back to my diet. Maybe I should look into some things, because I had this inkling that it was probably autoimmune. When I talked to my doctor, they said, you have some markers, but we need to send you to rheumatology. Well, it's a good 6-month wait to get into rheumatology. So here I am with these problems, and I'm put on a 6-month waiting period to determine what the problems are. I can't wait that long. I have a life. I have a business. I have a baby. I'm not going to wait 6 months to figure out what's going on and try and get a treatment. So
if they can even figure it out.
If they can figure it out, exactly. So, I started making those changes again. And within, I'd say 2 months, everything was just starting to disappear and feel better. And the swelling was starting to go away. And I had extreme dryness. My eyes, they would hurt. They would feel like I had like gritty sand in my eyes all the time. And just crazy things, dry mouth to the point where it was like cotton mouth all day long. And all of those things were starting to improve with my practice and with my dietary changes that I was making. And the other thing is I started relying on my husband more for help, because I wasn't getting any sleep with this newborn. She was a horrible sleeper. I swear this girl did not sleep until she was 4. So I finally got to the point where, I felt, okay, I can do something here. I know health. I know what movement can do. I know what diet can do. I know what nutrition can do. I know how they've affected me in the past. So let's try it. Let's just give it a shot, because that's all I've got. Really, that's all I have. So 6 months later, I went in and they were like, you're fine. You've got XYZ problems, which ended up being Sjogren's, Raynaud's, which is like a lack of circulation. It's like your circulation kind of almost cuts off, and your fingers, I live in Iowa, so it's cold here a lot. And my fingers were turning white and purple and blue and all kinds of crazy colors. It was the strangest thing. I didn't even know this could happen to people. So then they diagnosed me with those two problems. So basically, I ended up with 4 diagnosed autoimmune issues. Maybe I have more, but they're hit or miss. And honestly, I don't really feel them much anymore. Everything is pretty well under control for now. I know, again, when my hormones change or when I go through menopause or, things like that, when those happen, then the autoimmune can kind of crop back up again. And that's just the nature of autoimmune disease. So I constantly watch what I'm doing and how I'm taking care of myself. Self-care is very, very important in this process.
I was going to say, I mean, I want to unpack a lot of what you just said, but I want to go all the way back to the beginning, which is, to get diagnosed with 4 autoimmune diseases over, the last 25 years, plus possibly have markers for some others. I mean, we know autoimmune has a strong genetic component too. Do you know any other women in your family? Maybe they weren't diagnosed back in the day, but do you think that it's coming through your familial lines?
Absolutely. My grandmother had pretty serious arthritis. My mother did have Graves' disease. So that was a direct line of genetics. It's kind of like, somebody throwing a Frisbee and you can't move your arms. You're going to get hit with it somehow at some point in your life. And honestly, it's probably going to happen when you have the highest load of things happening in your life that are crushing you. So at that time, the first diagnosis when I got Graves' disease, I had just graduated from college. I started a job that I absolutely hated, and I was in the wrong profession. And I knew I was in the wrong profession. It was not the right place for me. It was causing tremendous amounts of stress, tremendous amounts of anxiety. And I know that probably played a role in the progression of the Graves' disease. And, it just is what it is. And
can I interrupt there?
Yes, please do.
Working as a yoga therapist for many years now with women mostly who have autoimmune disease, that is something we women refuse to look at the cues of the universe to tell us we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. And we are so hell-bent on staying in there and doing it anyway and pushing through it. I would say a big part of my work is giving people permission to leave situations that are not serving them and that are making them sick. And a lot of times when, that delinking process could take 2 years to get them ready to accept that and figure out what they're going to do and move on. But when they finally do, boom, so many things clear up. Has that been your experience too? Because I know you work with a lot of people who have autoimmune.
Yes, absolutely. It has. I noticed that a lot of the individuals that I've worked with have poor relationships. And maybe they're in the process of ending those relationships. And once those relationships break, things change and they start to feel better and they start to engage in lifestyle activities that make them happy and fulfill them in ways that they could not be fulfilled prior to when they were in that relationship. Yeah, it is. It's such a big thing, getting to that point where you can look at yourself and say, either I'm doing too much, I have things in my life that are holding me back or holding me down. I'm just in the wrong place at the wrong time and I need to rethink what I'm doing. Those things all play a role in, the progression, at least, of the disease. Yeah.
I just heard a beautiful research study that was done that basically showed a lot of women with autoimmune problems. The ones that do better are the ones that get involved in something very creative with the support of other women. And that's when their autoimmune clears up. I'm like, wow, that's yoga therapy at its best.
It is. It is. Absolutely. And, in Iowa, I'm definitely supported by a lot of women. That's, most of my clients are women. I have a handful of men. They love it just as much as the women do. But I would say on average, probably 75% of my clients are women. So yeah.
And you said another thing that I found very typical, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, is you started asking your husband for help. I find a lot of women and men with autoimmune disease, that's really hard for them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because lately I've been really getting into the polyvagal theory, which you're really into and you talk about all the time. But it's so intriguing because they've actually added now a people-pleasing component to the polyvagal theory, which made me so excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. Or that was me, at least. I wanted to please everyone. And it actually is so interesting because it is a fight or flight response that is masked by social engagement. So we have this, some of us, granted, it tends to be women probably a little bit more than men, I would think, from what I've seen. We have this need to please. And when people ask us for something, we say yes. We have a tendency to say yes too much, and we want to please. And what that ends up turning into at some point is we are foregoing our own needs and our own necessary survival techniques and our living process to please others. And it becomes a real issue later on. And I think that may, this is my own theory, but it seems that may actually have something to do with some people's autoimmune process. That we're people pleasers. We want to do everything right, and we want to do everything for everyone that asks us. And it's impossible to please everyone. We have to realize that. And I personally feel the day I realized that was the day I started to heal.
Right.
Because for me, it was a very serious situation. I just didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to delegate, and I didn't know how to say no. So,
and I think, I had the same situation. For me, it's almost seems like a control mechanism that if I please you enough, if I take care of you, then you're going to do what I want. There's this kind of sticky situation there, instead of, I'll take care of me and I'll do my self-care, and I'm going to need this time, and you're going to have to figure out your own dinner or whatever it is. And
right.
You're going to take care of you. And then we're going to come together as healthy individuals. I felt there was a lot of codependency tendencies that I had to heal within myself. And now my husband is so self-sufficient. I can go away for a month and he's totally cool. He's like, all right, bye, honey. But that was part of our healing process as a couple too, is me training him that, look, I am not going to be able to take care of you like your mom did when you were 2.
Right.
I'm not mommy.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you have kids, it adds a whole nother aspect to that. Now the whole caring issue, for children, you have to learn how to share that responsibility. And as a woman, it's very hard because you want to be that perfect mom. You want to be that mom that's there for their child, no matter what, always 100%. And I realized I had to share that responsibility. And then in the process, it's really interesting because I learned that he's actually really a wonderful caretaker. He's so good with her, so it's
how great for her too.
I know. She has a dad who's just there all the time, so it's amazing. But sharing that responsibility is so important when you're doing that caretaking responsibility. So.
And I think some people might say, well, how does yoga therapy play into this? Shouldn't this be a psychology issue? But it's really a self-love issue. It's I'm becoming embodied now and actually sensing and feeling what my needs are. I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I need a rest. Like those are yoga issues. And it's not to say a psychologist couldn't also help, but becoming embodied and really tuning into our own needs and being able to speak like, hey, I'm not going to be able to pick her up today because I'm going to need to have a little nap this afternoon. I got up at 4:00 in the morning. Like that is a embodiment issue, which is where I think the yoga therapy really comes in to sense what we need. Most autoimmune people that I know have no connection with their bodies.
Right.
They're like living from the neck up. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I did that for many years. So I think I pretty much was an expert at that. I think it involves, again, the need to please. And when you shut down from here down and you just live in your head all the time, you can push through things that you may not push through otherwise. So if you're not listening to what your body's telling you and what your body's saying, if it's saying, hey, stupid, rest, please rest now. You need to rest. And you're not listening, the next step is disease. So you have to realize that there's not a very large step between not listening to your body and the disease process. It's very close. It's a lot closer than we think it is.
Yeah.
So
And I mean, just a simple example that I've heard you talk about on your social media so much. And when I saw you talking about it on Facebook and Instagram, which you're very active on, I was like, yes, why didn't someone tell me that 20 years ago? And that's this idea of hydration. Like nobody's talking about autoimmune and hydration. And you talk a lot about it. And for me, that was one of the critical healing aspects. As I said before, there's so many causes that you can't figure out, from genetics to lifestyle. And then there's so many solutions. Nobody had talked to me about hydration. And until I found water, pumping water all day long with electrolytes, not just plain water, but with
right,
electrolytes,
right.
nothing was happening. Nothing was getting fixed. So can you talk a little bit about hydration?
Yeah. So, I mean, hydration, our body is so much water. There's a ton of water in our body. And if we don't have that water available for processing our systems, our body doesn't work. It kind of goes into shutdown. And the electrolytes are really important too, because if we just flood the body with pure water and there aren't any electrolytes to balance out what we're putting in the body as far as water is concerned, then our organs also can't process and can't work properly. We use calcium, we use potassium, we use those electrolytes. Our heart uses them, our muscles use them. All of our organ systems actually use those electrolytes. So if we just flush everything out and don't have those electrolytes to balance, then we're also in a pinch. We've got a problem. So yeah, hydration is super important. I like to do around 2 liters a day. What I like to try to get, some people say 2.7, around 2 liters. A little bit more than 2 liters is probably good. I think filling up a water bottle at the beginning of the day and then drinking that, and then just knowing that, okay, I've had 1 liter today. Now I need to fill it up again and drink that 2nd liter. That's how I keep track. I know exactly how much is in my bottle. And once I drink that down, then I know, okay, this is how much more I need to add to get to the end of the day. I know it's hard sometimes when you're, working maybe a job where you're like me, talking all day, but I stop and take sips. I'll be like, excuse me for a moment. And I'll go take a drink. The client understands that I need to drink water because I, might work 5 hours straight and be talking the entire time. So it's really important.
I think people don't realize how much talking actually dries us out. It's vata, right? So
yes,
it really is very drying. And, as yoga therapists, we may or may not recommend electrolytes depending on how we've been trained and, our scope of practice and all of that. But for me, that was critical because if I drank 2 liters of water, literally 10 minutes later, the water would just go right through me. And when I found the electrolytes, it was like my cells could finally absorb it. Right. And
absolutely.
So I'm like you, I have these 2 huge, they're yellow. I call them the gold zone things, containers. And I just fill them up at the beginning of the day. And by the time I go to bed, I better have had both of those. And that's how I track it. And, they even have containers with like ounces on the sides of it too. Now you've probably seen those. So that was another recommendation I had for people, like, get on there and see how many ounces you're actually having. Because it's really easy to go a whole day and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't drink any water today.
Yep.
And, I think a lot of these autoimmune diseases, if we look at them from an Ayurvedic perspective, it's rajas of the mind, right?
Yep.
And so it's fire and air and wind, and that is very hot and drying. So what are some of the other major things that you do to help people? You don't have to tell us all your trade secrets, but what are some, like hydration was a big one for me. Is there any other big ones like that you just feel like, yeah, this is a critical thing that we need to monitor and work into our lives?
Yeah, I really feel like everyone with autoimmune disease at some point should be tested for allergies. A lot of us have, we're just allergic people in general. And we have a lot of allergies that we may not know about to maybe foods or even our environment. So it's really important to have an idea of what it is that's causing an increased inflammatory response in the body, right? And when we get tested for those allergens, then it gives us a better idea. Okay, you have an extreme inflammatory response to, for me, it's dairy. If I eat dairy, my immune response shoots up. And I actually have a blood test that has proven that that happens. So for me, just knowing that that's something that I need to avoid is really helpful. Because then if I eat some and I get inflamed and I'm like really not happy the next day, then I know, oh, that's why, that's why. So then I can avoid it for several weeks to kind of get that cleaned out and get it cleared out of my body. And then the inflammation goes away. So I realize now that that's a trigger. And triggers are very important in autoimmune disease because we all have different triggers, right?
Right.
So we kind of have to go through this process of learning, what are my triggers? And when you have those immune tests, those immune response tests to allergens, it tells you, okay, this is a trigger. Now I know it's actually proven to be a trigger for me. So I probably should either avoid that or be very careful with it, right? Not do a lot of it. Just if I do it just a little bit, it's a little treat, and then I'm going to go off of it for several weeks so that I get back into that state of balance. Because otherwise we're just flooding the body with new things to be potential flares, right? Because when we have autoimmune disease, we usually call whatever happens to us, maybe it's swelling or maybe it's something else, but we call that flares. Mm-hmm. So, knowing those triggers is very important.
It's reminding me when I had this Sjogren's problem, on the left side of my face, my dentist thought it was like a dental problem and needing a root canal. So I went through all this dental work needlessly. It still didn't fix it. It was, thousands of dollars later. And then finally I was like, you know what? All my friends at the time were getting off gluten. It was like when being gluten-free became kind of en vogue. And so I was like, oh, I'll try to get off gluten. And that's what resolved it. And that's how I figured out, oh, this is not a dental issue. This is an autoimmune disease that's getting flared by gluten. And I'll still have a little gluten, but not nearly as much as I used to.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's made a huge difference for me, just knowing what it is that I actually react to. For some people, it's bananas. For some people, it's peaches, pit fruit. It's really interesting what people might have reactions to. Getting those food allergy tests are very, very important. And I think they can lead you in some direction, at least. Yeah. I never had a rheumatologist mention that to me, but the less inflammation you have in your body, the less likely you are to have flares. We know that.
And those food allergies can shift. I mean, there was a time where I had that test done and it said I had an allergy to eggs. And then a few years later, I didn't, right? And so that's not just a one-time thing. That might be ongoing every year or two, have it done again, see what your body's reacting to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And don't you think that that's another place where yoga and, whether it's your postures or your breathing or your meditation, we know that yoga and yoga therapy decrease the immune response and kind of help decrease the inflammation. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes. When you practice yoga, it basically calms all of your systems. So it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And when we're in that parasympathetic nervous system response, we are less likely to have the markers for inflammation that we would have if we were not practicing. Everything kind of drops as far as like inflammatory response, and our heart rate we know drops, and our blood pressure drops, and our breathing rate drops. So all of those things can contribute to lowering our immune response and lowering our inflammation in our body, those inflammatory markers. So if we have a regular yoga practice, we definitely are less likely to have those higher inflammatory markers. So that says a lot for autoimmune disease, I think. And I can't wait to see the research that's coming out in the future, because I know there have been some really good studies done on the autoimmune disease response. So
I think having that direct effect where you just kind of dial down the nervous system is so key, but also something that's been helpful for myself and my clients is just the self-awareness of when I'm getting wound up. Like, okay, here we go. And
Exactly.
it's almost like my emotions are overreacting as well
Yeah.
as my immune system, which I'm sure are very
Yes.
connected. Right. But
Yes.
that self-awareness of, okay, what's going on here? Let's just in life in general, let's turn it down a notch, aim.
That ability to self-regulate is so important. What I've learned from just my own yoga practice and yoga therapy in general is that it's an every minute practice, not once a day, not an hour. It's an every minute practice. So what that means is once you feel those cues coming up, like the shoulders rising up by the ears, or breathing into the upper chest, or feeling that fluttery feeling in your stomach that you know is a sensation of that sympathetic nervous system starting to amp up. If you feel those things, immediately start that deep breathing, immediately start, using your self-soothing techniques that you know in yoga, and it will start to over time change the way you react to stress. And it makes a huge difference. It's not something you practice 1 hour, 3 days a week. It's something you practice every day, all the time. And, once you learn what those cues are, you can practice it anytime you'd like. And it really helps. It's huge. So yeah, I think that self-regulation is so important.
I love that. And I would also add to that for me, because I'm a highly sensitive person, I just kind of, what did my nephew tell me the other day? I'm highly strung. That's just, I personally believe a lot of people who have autoimmune, it's tied back to childhood trauma, but that's just a whole nother topic.
Yep.
But I think for me, it's not, I do the deep breathing, but what's especially helpful is the deep breathing with movement, because it's almost like my tissues start to freeze up. And I feel like even if I'm breathing, the oxygen feels like it's not getting delivered to the tissues. So to get up from my desk and get on the treadmill for 10 minutes and do deep breathing while walking, or do some asana yoga postures, well, it's almost like for me, it's not just breathing that like maybe gets the air in from the outside to my lungs, but somehow it has to get distributed to my tissues. And that makes all the difference. So COVID has been a real blessing in one way, because it's given me the space in my life to actually do self-care in a way where I can get up from my desk every hour and do 5 or 10 minutes of movement.
Right.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I also prefer movement, but I know that I have a lot of clients who are unable to get up and practice yoga during the day because maybe they do work at a hospital, or they're a doctor, a nurse, or I'm right, very close to the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. So a lot of my clients are medical professionals. They may not have the opportunity to go move once an hour or twice an hour or something like that. So for them, I think the breathing techniques are much easier for them to rein in and practice. But yeah, if you're, now working at home and COVID has given you that opportunity, take advantage of it. Get up, move, and breathe, and use your breathing with your movement. Because yeah, it does. It helps you breathe into new spaces when you can move with that breath. It's very different. It's a very different feeling than just breathing. Yeah.
And I remember when I was teaching in the classroom, just standing still, standing up in front of the class teaching, my legs would turn into cement. So then on the way back from whatever classroom I was in back to my office, I would try to walk really slowly and mindfully and breathe all the way down into my legs and try to get the tissues, receiving the oxygen. So I think there's a lot of ways we can visualize that and implement that, but nobody told me any of this. I just had to figure it out on my own. Oh, my legs feel like cement. What could I do? And I don't know how you feel. Have you ever seen the vibration board that I sometimes play around with? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I have. And I have clients who have those too. They look really amazing. I think anytime you put yourself on a slightly unstable surface, it's good for your neuromuscular system. So we do that a lot in Pilates. We put people on unstable devices and props and have them try to, stabilize with these pieces of equipment. And it's so fun to watch them from going from not being able to balance to being able to stabilize and hold that balance. But it's a neuromuscular connected thing. It's that balance and that stability that comes from within that maybe going and lifting weights in a gym isn't going to give you. So it's very different.
And I think the vibration thing for me, because I tend to retain fluid in my lower body, it helps pump lymph, which I know a lot of people with autoimmune disease, we have this issue of there's like tamas in the body and we can't quite get the lymph to move back up the legs. So sometimes I'll do if I'm feeling really like a lot of water retention in my lower body, I'll do an entire practice on my vibration plate. I put a few little videos on Instagram but I guess this just goes back to that idea of, wow, there's so many different techniques that we could tap into, from mental, emotional, where we're looking at our relationships and our communication style and checking in with our needs, to vibration plates, to hydration, I think this is why it's such a hard puzzle to figure out. Can you talk a little bit about how you guide people to kind of go through all the possibilities and figure out which ones are actually triggers for their flare-ups?
So I think just be mindful, starting by looking at all the potential causes and then kind of narrowing it down for them to what are the things that I currently am doing that are potential causes of maybe more inflammation within my body, because we can't really narrow it down to a single root cause for autoimmune disease. That's very, very hard because there are so many different systems involved. But what is really interesting is, a lot of people, they're working on the process of narrowing down and they find that diet plays a huge role. But then they don't understand that along with diet, you have the nervous system controlling the digestive system, right?
Right.
So what often will happen is maybe they start and they change their diet a little bit and they start to feel a little bit better, but they're still dealing with a lot of symptoms because they have not healed the nervous digestive system, right? There's this gut-brain connection that's really important, and people are trying to heal the gut, but they haven't yet looked at the brain. And so we need to really focus on, and that's where the yoga plays a role, and it plays a huge role in getting that parasympathetic nervous system to respond so that our gut can then do its job, because it's fully on and it's effective and it's doing what it needs to do. And also, when we're in the right place with our nervous system, our digestive system can then support the proper gut flora, which is all the bacteria and everything we need in our gut to do what it needs to do to digest our food properly. So then it becomes not all about the diet, right? Which everybody's very, very focused on the diet. It becomes not all about the diet. It also becomes about the nervous system and healing the nervous system as well. And if you start with the nervous system, the gut will heal a heck of a lot faster than if you just sit with the gut first. So I think that's another really important way to kind of divide up your triggers and decide, okay, if I've looked at diet and it's working well for me, but it's not helping fully, right? I still have a lot of symptoms that I'm dealing with. Next, look at your nervous system and see if you have hit that well. And if you haven't really focused on that nervous system, then that's when you need to start the yoga practice, yoga therapy, because it's huge. I mean, it's a huge portion of what is controlling all of our systems. So,
and to your point, I think so many times people with autoimmune problems have emotional eating problems, meaning there's a stressor, they can't cope with it. Food is the solution to get some serotonin or some dopamine or some self-soothing. And so then they'll end up eating too much sugar or caffeine or whatever triggers their autoimmune flare. And really, if we had been able to help them learn how to self-soothe through yoga, through breathing, through meditation, through postures, and kind of get to the root of, okay, you're having an emotional response. There's something other than food that can soothe you. Let's try these techniques. Let's do a little yoga nidra. I'll create a special yoga nidra just for you when you're having this trigger. And let's try to work on maybe the emotional eating response. Not again that we're dietitians, but we're working through the nervous system, right? Yep. And when we divide a human being up into, we've got the nutritionist and we got the endocrinologist, like there's still something missing. Even if you go to the allergy specialist and you go to the nutritionist and you go to this yoga therapy, because we are working primarily on the nervous system, we are needed as much as any of those others. And in fact, I think you could do all of those, but if you didn't address the nervous system, you still might not be able to figure out your specific puzzle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of individuals are kind of missing the boat, because I belong to a lot of like Facebook groups that are focused around these diseases and autoimmune problems. And I just keep seeing, people will say, well, I've done everything, I changed my diet. I don't do gluten. I don't do dairy. I've done all these things, and they're frustrated because they're still not healing. And I think a lot of times they have not addressed the nervous system, and the nervous system it controls everything else. So how can you not address the nervous system? And, and then beyond that, which mode are we dealing with? Do we have trauma, right? If we have trauma, then we might need to start with healing that trauma first, because that's probably put us into shutdown mode, right? And if we're shut down, we're not in our bodies at all.
Right.
So then we kind of need to start with the body and start with some gentle movement, right? Because breathing and meditation, we can do that all day long, and that's not going to probably get us into our bodies so we can actually start to heal that trauma that's within. So that's a whole other
that's
piece.
Where the Porges theory is such a beautiful application of what we're trying to do. Like, if you can't sense or feel your body, that's step number one. Like, let's get you embodied and out of the fight, flight, freeze, shutdown mode. And then we can start to self-regulate.
Right.
So we just have a few minutes left, and I want to leave a little bit of time to talk about your work and what exciting projects you have coming up. But is there any last bits of knowledge or wisdom that you'd like to share about the work that you do around autoimmune, or do you feel complete?
I feel pretty complete. I feel like we've kind of touched on a little bit of everything, and I'd love to talk to people more. If they want to, they can reach out, and I'm happy to.
So Marcie, you have a thriving business. You're one of the hardest working women I know with your center. I mean, I don't know, it looks like you're in there 10 or 12 hours a day, and not quite that long. Okay. But you work really, really hard. And also, I know you created a course to kind of help, I'll call it a small functional group, to help people figure out what their triggers are, what their flare-ups are, kind of work through all of these different things as a small group online. Are you still doing that program? Do you have another cohort coming up?
Yeah, actually, I was working on that program, and then I ran the program twice, and it went very well. And I had a lot of really, excited people because they were starting to heal and feel better. But I've kind of started to split my focus a little bit more into C-IAYT and focusing on the approved provider course. So that's now what I'm working on, with going in that direction. And I just got my course approved, which I'm super excited about. So I have the name of it, but I don't have it with me right now. So I will.
But just to be clear, this is one where you're taking yoga teachers or yoga therapists and teaching them how to do what it is that you've learned to do over the last 25 years.
Yes.
To
Yes.
become a practitioner.
Exactly. Yes. How to become a practitioner that specifically works with individuals who have autoimmune or chronic illness. So yeah, that's the course, and it should start in January. So I'm super excited about that.
So just tell us how it works. Is it online? Is it weekly meetings? Are there videos?
It's going to be 50-50. So it'll be 50% synchronous, 50% asynchronous. And we'll meet every week and kind of work through individual presentation of what's happening in your body and what's going on with your process and things like that, and kind of checking in. And then we will also have that component of learning the process of working with someone else who has autoimmune, and also going into especially the yoga therapy portion of that, and how to work with people so that they can start to get that healing process going.
You know, I just think this is the future, where people are being trained to work with clients who have diabetes or autoimmune disease or pregnancy or infertility. Like, I really think, even though many of us are already a certified yoga therapist, when you're going to work with a really specific group like autoimmune, you actually need more than the generalist training. You need to go in and really understand that smaller niche. So I'm really excited about the program that you have coming up, and just to know that you've been through it yourself for decades, kind of having your body flare up and then calm down, and that, you know, knowing this is an ongoing process for us and our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, I cannot think of a more rewarding group to work with than people who are suffering, and trying to get them to the point where they're no longer suffering, and then watch them blossom and grow once they're no longer suffering. So
yeah, it's amazing. Well, where can we find you? Like I said, you're very active on social media. I know you have a website, which I'm sure your APD approved professional development course for autoimmune practitioners will be listed. What's your website?
Yes.
Where can we find you on Instagram?
Absolutely. So serenitywellnesstherapy.com is my handle. And so that's my website. You can contact me from the website. I also have that course now listed online. It is, I think, $300 off if people sign up before December. So
and when you say online, it's on your website, but they could also go to the www.iayt.org website, find that autoimmune course, and then circle back to your website.
Yes. And I'm not sure they have it listed yet, but it is on my website right now. Okay. So I think it's, I don't know, a couple more days or something before they're formally finished. But yeah, it's been approved and it's ready to go. So I'm super excited to offer it.
And what about Instagram? I see you on there doing reels quite often. What's your handle there?
It's Serenity Wellness Therapy.
Okay. So all of your handles are
Serenity Wellness Therapy.
Good branding, lady.
Yeah, super easy. Super easy.
Yeah. And if someone's in Iowa City, Iowa, they could stop by at your actual center too.
They could, and I would love to see them. So
I think you're a pioneer, because, you know, I'm from Iowa too. And when I go home, I don't see cutting edge centers like this that are really kind of a little bit ahead of their time. They're a dime a dozen out here in California, but I just want to honor you for being a trailblazer. I know it can't be easy to kind of bring some very new, fresh ideas to a population that maybe it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah. It's been a challenge. Iowa is, you know, we're coming around. It takes time, but people are getting it. And, you know, I have new people come in every week, and they have their own issues. And, you know, it's so fun. Like I said, I have the best time meeting new people and learning about them so I can then help them. So it's great.
Have you been able to, this will be my last question, I promise. Have you been able to get any doctors to understand what it is you do and how effective you are, and refer people?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have a lot of doctors who come here. So that's helpful. I have a couple of cardiologists, and I've had physical therapists come here in the past. And so, yeah, it's been really, really good. And I do get referrals quite often, also from the mindfulness program at the university. I get a lot of referrals from different different spaces. And sometimes I'm not even aware that they've been referred to me. It's just we're talking and then all of a sudden, oh, you know, so-and-so. And okay, I guess they referred you. That's great.
And I just want to put a shout out there because I think people underestimate how having a cardiologist come to your center as their weekly routine, how many people that cardiologist or PT might tell about you. Like that's a major source of getting more people in the door, which is probably why you're so busy at your center.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's word of mouth is huge. I mean, that's all I've really ever done since I opened my studio in 2008. It's been a long time now, but yeah, it's all word of mouth and people just telling other people, hey, you need this. This would be so good for you. And, you know, they're saying it because they're getting the same, you know, they're getting something out of it and they love it and they want their friends and family to know. So. Yeah.
Well, congratulations for having such a successful business and expanding into these new areas, which is not easy. You know, creating an entire APD course and marketing it and kind of building a new niche for yourself in addition to your full-time job. I just want to honor you because I know how hard that is. And most people can't work that hard, don't want to work that hard, don't understand what it means to work that hard. And you have just taken it in and said, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going to figure this out. So I just want to congratulate you for that.
Thank you so much, Amy.
All right. Well, have a great day. It was so nice to be with you today.
Thank you. It was lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler. And today our guest was Marcie Evans from Iowa City, Iowa, a pioneer in the Midwest for yoga therapy. And one of the things that I found really interesting that came out of our discussion today was this idea that as we become a certified yoga therapist, we are kind of a generalist, right? That those 800 plus hours of training on top of your 200-hour yoga teacher training, so let's say 1,000 hours of training, are more for general, how do you work with a human being who has some imbalances or is looking for greater well-being in their lives. But what we are finding is that even after becoming a certified yoga therapist, oftentimes we need to get more training in a very specific area because we have to meet the pain points of very specific people. We're not out there saying, hey, come to yoga therapy. Nobody knows what yoga therapy is. Nobody knows how it can help them. Nobody understands that the general client out there doesn't understand how powerful yoga therapy is and how much it can transform their life. So they're not looking for yoga therapy. They don't even know they need yoga therapy, which is why those that are marketing yoga therapy are having a harder time. But as soon as you do what Marcie has done, which is find this very specific niche and target the pain points of that niche, suddenly you become an expert in one or two or three areas. And I always tell people, you're not getting married forever. You don't have to always only do that thing, but you'll become well known for a couple of different areas probably. And so that's one of the things we teach in our business course is how do you decide on a niche? How do you tie your story into it? What is your why? Who are you going to serve? How are you going to serve them? What kind of programming are you going to come up with? How are you going to market that? How are you going to advertise that? And really getting the whole business laid out. And we've expanded that to 11 months now because we're finding that that's the minimum time it takes to really put all those steps in place. And so I think this idea of getting your C-IAYT, but then deciding what areas you might want to specialize in, especially through what Marcie mentioned, the approved professional development courses. So she is now going to be training other practitioners who are already yoga teachers and maybe already yoga therapists how to work with people with her system with respect to autoimmune, right? So that approved professional development course, it's great CEs, continuing education through IAYT, but it's also necessary to kind of niche down. And at the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, we offer about 13 different APD courses. That is a lot of courses, right? But a lot of people come to us after they've already gotten their C-IAYT and they say, now I want to specialize in mental health, or now I want to brush up on my musculoskeletal assessment and therapeutic plan creation for backs and necks and hips and all that. Or, wow, my yoga therapy program really focused on the spiritual aspects, but not the mental health aspects, or, whatever it is. So it's really interesting to see that even after that extensive training, people still come back for continuing education. And I just was updating all of our APD courses in the last couple of days. IAYT now offers over 1,000. I think I read that right on the website, 1,000 different approved professional development courses as continuing education. So that's pretty amazing. There's a lot to choose from. And I think most of us as yoga therapists are dedicated to continuing to learn and grow and transform, both professionally and personally. So thank you for listening. And it's been my honor and pleasure to be with you today. If you ever want to give us feedback, you can always email us. One of the emails you can use is yoga@amywheeler.com. You could also do welcome@theoptimalstate.com. You could come on our Facebook group. We have a special Facebook group for this podcast called the Yoga Therapy Hour Discussion Group. You could come in there and talk to us. Or if you're willing to get on a platform like Spotify where you're listening to this podcast and give us a rating and tell us what you love about our podcast right there publicly, that's always super helpful also to get other people to hear about us and find out about us. So thanks again. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle, and we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.